Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you for that warm introduction. And Tim, thanks for having me here. I love Vancouver. This is one of my favorite cities in the whole world. Any excuse I get to come to Vancouver, I'll take it. I think a PowerPoint is going to be coming up, too. We have, there you go. So I'm just fresh off of a campaign that housed 100,000 of the very most vulnerable people off the streets of America. And it's just that magnitude, that number of people is kind of, I think, hard to really wrap your brain around. So I want to share with you one of my favorite things from that whole experience. I mean, on the one hand, it's about this large-scale change, but on the other hand, it really just all comes down to each human interaction that we have with one another. And my favorite part of my job was when someone would come up to me and pull me aside and say, "Hey, this is why I became a social worker. I had forgotten. Thank you. This is what I wanted to do. I haven't gotten to do this," right? And so I wanted to start with sharing you some of my favorite things that I got to hear as the director of the 100,000 Homes campaign. So this is from Bonnie in Los Angeles, and she said, "Since becoming involved with the campaign, I have found a renewed love and compassion for the clients we serve. I have found a new joy in the work I'm doing. I go home every night and talk to my family about the love I have again for my work. It's as if I were a therapist for the first time again after 20 years of working with the homeless mentally ill. I am so grateful for a chance to be of service in this program." And I started collecting these emails that I got from people over the years, and I have about 100 of that. They all say really close to this. Here's one more. "Is being a part of the campaign has been the biggest honor of my life. Dramatic? Maybe, but absolutely true. I love you guys." And that's from Melanie in Salt Lake City. So this campaign, any large-scale change movement, it's about the change you're creating in the world, but it's also about what you bring forth in yourselves and one another. And I want to share my thoughts about how you create these kinds of things. It doesn't have to be a campaign. It's about how do you create that kind of change in the world that really connects with people's deeper purpose and why they're here on the planet at all. So let me do a little bit of go back in time of how did you get to something like that? You don't just, pop out of a can and house 100,000 people, right? It doesn't just happen overnight. So I'll take you back a mini quick history lesson in my life. I was in the Army. I served for 9 years as a veteran. I didn't want to lie about being gay, so I quit. Well, let's just say I floundered for a little while, and I was a stockbroker, which I really didn't love doing. And the person who I had gotten out of the Army to live happily ever after with cheated on me, and I routinely found her, with her new girlfriend, and that was very traumatizing. And I had gotten a puppy to kind of comfort myself. And then one day, as I was a stockbroker, which was just awful, I was right after 9/11 too. And oddly, mostly what I was doing as a stockbroker was helping people manage their fear. So this actually relates. I got a call from the little doggy daycare place where I left my puppy. And through tears, someone told me, "Becky, I'm so sorry, but your dog died, this little puppy. My puppy died in daycare." And that was a very sad day in my life. It was April 8th, 2002. And I took the next day off work from a stockbroker, which stockbrokers don't work very much, actually. I took the next day off of work, and they really have martini lunches in that. And hung out with my best friend, and I said, this is awful, right? And I was really feeling sorry for myself. And it was just kind of this, it was almost like a country song, right? If I had lost my truck, it'd be a country song. But I didn't have a truck, right? But what can I do to stop feeling sorry for myself was my big conundrum at the time. And I didn't know what the answer was, but I knew it was something in being of service. Right? I just want to throw myself fully into being of service somehow. I don't care how. I just want to stop feeling sorry for myself. About a month later, I got a phone call from an old teacher of mine at West Point, and he said, put your stockbroker pencil down and call this person immediately. It was Roseanne Haggerty. And Roseanne hired me to reduce street homelessness by 2/3 in 3 years in Times Square of New York City, which at the time was the highest density of street homelessness in New York City. So if we can reduce it by 2/3 in 3 years, in this one place, we can really demonstrate something. And she had gotten this harebrained scheme from Louise Casey, who was your keynote speaker last year. Louise Casey had done a 75% reduction in the UK, with, by the way, the stamp of approval and millions of pounds from the government. And for some reason, Roseanne thought we could do this grassroots, bottom up in New York City. And she hired me with zero background in any of this. So I knew nothing about homelessness. I knew my job was to reduce street homelessness by 2/3 in 3 years in Times Square. I went out with outreach teams and with a complete blank slate, and to my somewhat surprise and horror, they walked right past the people who seemed to be in very bad shape to me. And this was in a city where there was a legal right to shelter, and I said, hey, why'd we just pass that guy? And I'm talking, not making a whole lot of sense, right? And noticeably unclean, very, very dirty, and like no shoes, and it's really cold outside. And what the outreach workers would say was they don't want it. They're resistant, they're service resistant. And I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. What does that mean? Well, they don't want what we're selling. And so I started very early on thinking, well, maybe you're selling the wrong thing. What do they want? And so we went out and asked people on the streets what they wanted, and they all wanted housing. Big headline. And we started, there was no mechanism in New York City at the time for someone to move from the streets to housing. The assumption was if you wanted housing, you would go to a shelter. And then, the shelter would do stuff so that you would somehow be appealing to property managers, and then maybe you could move into housing if you earned it. And so even though the godfather of Housing First comes from New York City, Sam Simbaris, who's here, who is one of my idols in this work, that notion of Housing First still hadn't spread throughout to all of the frontline workers. We started doing that. In the first year, we housed about 45 people straight off the streets. And homelessness did not go down, and we realized we needed to recalibrate who we were housing so that we were housing the people who were always there, who had been there the longest. When we housed those people have been out for 20 or 30 years, and people like this Ed Givens here, he's actually was on the streets of Skid Row in Los Angeles. That's when we started seeing reductions in the number of people sleeping outside. So we really inverted the way that outreach was done. In the course of that, we discovered that as we were housing people, before we could actually get them into the housing, people were dying at an alarming rate. It was distressing for our staff, and I think it happens all the time. It's just that we don't always even know it, because those aren't people that necessarily we're actively targeting for our outreach efforts. And we found out about some research in Boston about there's certain conditions that do put you at a high risk for dying. And we integrated those conditions into our outreach practices. So we were constantly, routinely, proactively scanning the neighborhood for who's out there. I want their pictures, I want their names. This is a little bit, goes into my human intelligence background. And how long have they been out there? And do they have the stuff that's gonna kill them? Because if they do, let's bump them up on the list. So that's how we did outreach. We got homelessness down by 87% in Times Square, and other cities started asking us, hey, can you come help us get our street homelessness down too? So for a couple years, I traveled the country helping communities adapt this tool. We called it the Vulnerability Index. It kind of snowballed into this community experience where volunteers would go out. We'd train volunteers on a Monday. On Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, they'd go out from 4 to 6 in the morning. They'd canvass all of the streets of their city. They'd ask each person to complete a short survey, and they'd take their picture. And then by Friday, we would do a community briefing where we'd show their pictures, and we'd say, this is who's been out there the longest, who's gonna die if you don't do something different. And it was this catalytic emotional experience at the community level. And really, literally, like as I would be briefing, like I could see people's faces, and they're like, I didn't know they were gonna die, And it was like this shocking moment for them. And so there's this reframing of homelessness from whether or not someone deserves something to the, hey, this is an urgent public health crisis, that this is what was happening on the streets. I learned about large-scale change from my now business partner, Joe McCannon, and like, what if you made this bigger? Like, I kept getting calls from cities of, we just moved 50 people in last week. And I was like, that took us a whole year to do back on Times Square. Like, people were catapulting beyond the performance of what we had gotten in New York. So it wasn't this arrogance of, we need to replicate our program. It was this whole notion of people can take one idea and make it better, right? I think there's a humility in that was actually really exciting. So we got this thought of, well, what if we could house 100,000 people? And, which is a big number, and we mostly just kind of made it up. I mean, it was just a really, really big number. And some of the people who have been on that team are here as well, and I hope you'll get to talk with them later today. So Kat Johnson and Jessica Venegas and Paul Howard have all been on the 100,000 Homes campaign team. But we also had a leadership advisory committee, and Mark Horvath and Ken Craybill were on that. And so it really engaged people all over the country. And what if we could house 100,000 people like Ed? And Ed had been on the streets for 24 years. He was chronically inebriated. He was constantly drunk and in and out of every kind of treatment program. And this is going to really surprise you, but when they offered him, Ed, would you like housing? He said yes. And when the campaign was over, when the 100,000th person moved into housing, and that took 4 years, the White House threw a party in honor of the movement and of the communities that had housed these 100,000 people. And Ed came with us. So that's Ed, right? That's Ed and Roseanne, the woman who rescued me from being a stockbroker. So this is kind of amazing, right? And so this is my, oops, wrong way. This is my wonder question, right? So I want all of you to leave here with a wonder question too. So my wonder question right now, the thing that I get up in the morning wondering about is, how can we engage at least 1 billion people? And in engaging those 1 billion people, how can we solve the world's biggest problems in the next 50 years? So that 50 years from now, people wake up and they're like, wonder what I'm gonna do today? Because there's no big problems left, right? Like that's the world that I wanna create, right? What would people do if we didn't have big problems to solve, right? So I personally believe that transformation on a scale much larger than any of us have ever really even imagined is totally possible. And I'm devoting my life to helping people know how to make change like that, just like it's just nothing, right? I've lived it, it's in my bones. I know that you can just wake up one day and be like, what if we housed 100,000 people, just like Ed? And then a couple years later, boom, it's done. So I wanna share with you what I know to be true about this, with the asterisk that I'm always learning, and this could be just total bullshit. And I wanna just be really humble about this and just put it in a Canadian context. You have a different context you're operating in. I don't know all of the parameters and constraints that you have, but here's one promise I will make to you is I will use the word process, and we will talk about beer and hockey. All right? So are we in? Are you in? All right. Okay, let's do it. All right. So raise your hand if this looks vaguely familiar, the diffusion of innovation curve. Okay. All right. All right, I like you guys. Okay. So the diffusion of innovation curve is why I have optimism that we actually can create really big change together. So it works. It's kind of like a 12-step program. You know, they say if you work it, it works. If you work it, it works. It's just like that. So in any given group of people, right, there's about 3% that are innovators, and they're off talking to other people in other sectors, and people wonder how come they're not at the office, and they're not really that interested in your particular sector, but they synthesize ideas in really cool ways and come up with out-of-the-box ways of thinking, and they're good folks, and they're the ones who come up with the idea. But the early adopters are people who know a good idea when they hear it, and they actually know how to take something and make it real in the real world. And they have the courage and the willingness to try something. So anytime you have a good idea, you want to find those early adopters and give them some love. The next group is the early majority, and they're not going to do it until they've seen the early adopters do it and it worked out okay. But once they see that, like, well, it looked okay in San Francisco, they'll be willing to try it in their city, right? That's the next group. That's the big, big chunk of group people too. The late majority are people who mostly are on the sidelines and they're watching it and they're a little more skeptical and they're more inclined to wait until the regulations change. You know, well, when the regulations change, I'll be happy to do that. Meanwhile, I'm going to keep smoking or whatever it is that you're doing, right? That's like, done, right? And then the laggards, they ain't gonna change no matter what. So don't worry about them, you know? Don't worry about the laggards. Don't worry about people who are further down the innovation curve than where you're at right now. You're going to get to them eventually, except the laggards, but that's okay, right? You will get to them, but there's a couple of things that you can do that help you get further down this innovation curve faster. And that's what I'm going to share with you. So before we do that, think about what idea or practice do you want to spread? And it could be across your whole country, across the whole world. It could be in your community. It could be in your family. You know, like, what is one thing that's a good idea that you want to spread? And when we say spread and scale, what I mean by that is until everyone who could possibly benefit from this thing has benefited, right? So it might be that you don't want people dying on your streets anymore. It might be that you want to do, you know, real housing first, real housing first. You know, not watered down, we're saying housing first because people pay for it now, but like real housing first, right? Or, you know, community solving any problem together. What is that thing for you? Because I'm going to give you some practical hints. So when you have that thing that you want to spread, whatever that may be, there's really only one thing that you're up against as you're trying to make your way down this diffusion curve, and that is fear. And the key to creativity, to having a wildly creative life, is to face into your fear. Fear is a source of creative energy, but you have to face it, right? If you're just like, I'm not looking, right? You don't get the juice that comes from that energy. It's in the facing into the fear and being like, whoa, I just felt scared. Then you can transform that into something else. It's kind of like a wave, right? Fear is a wave, and if you're gonna surf, you need to ride the wave. That's what you have to do. And fear manifests itself in 5 major forms in work for social change. And I'm gonna go over each of these, and I'm gonna share the antidotes. And you may recognize other people as I'm sharing with you the way that this fear shows up. But the super ninjas in the room, you're going to recognize yourselves, right? Because we all have these fears in ourselves too. And it's the facing in these fears in ourselves and others that really opens you up to become a vehicle for transformation. So if you recognize yourself, raise your hand. That would be fun. All right. We're all going to love our failure here today. So, fear number 1, insecurity, right? The fear of failure itself. And when you look at the whole way our pedagogy is set up, right, in school, right, where there's a right answer, right, mostly, right, or, you know, and the penalty for failure in society does not look kindly upon failure. It's ostracism. You know, we're getting at core, deep down, reptile brain fears, right? Of, I don't want to be ostracized or fully left out. It's just, it shows up as caution, self-doubt, worry about other people will say or think, and we've all done this. And some things you may hear, you know, not yourself, but other people, right? When you're playing with this favor of fear is, well, you know, it's a really interesting idea, but we don't have enough housing in our city, you know, or, well, yeah, I love that, but gosh, our vacancy rates are, you know, really low. We only have 1% vacancy rate. My favorite thing to say when people say that is I say, what is your vacancy rate? And they say, 1%. And I'm like, how many apartments do you have? And they're like, 100,000. I'm like, okay, so you have 1,000 apartments. Like, do the math. There's some number that you can get your hands on, right? Like, it's just a math. We're going to talk about math today, too, the beer and hockey. Here's another thing that people say with the insecurity is, you know, well, those people aren't doing their part, so I'm not going to do, you know, I'm not going to do it until those other people do something, right? And then this one is like, my favorite thing that everyone says is like, well, we're different. It's different here, you know? And I promise you, having spoken to hundreds of communities, the more you claim you're different, the more you're actually just like everyone else. I hate to break that to you, right, Mark? Right? Yeah, so it's a little joke. So here, you guys know these fears, right? You see them, and you guys are change agents. You want to push down that diffusion curve. So the antidote to this kind of fear, I believe, is a clear, ambitious aim, and setting the tone that there's no such thing as failure. It's just made up. There's only learning. That's all there is. Buckminster Fuller, who's my favorite, I love him. He said, "There's no such thing as a failed experiment. There are only experiments with unexpected outcomes," right? And can we bring that attitude to our work for social change? So a clear time-bound aim, 100,000 people off the streets of America by July 2013. It took us an extra year, you know, but by July 2013, that is a clear time-bound aim. And when we first conceived of this, my biggest fear as the imminent director of this thing was like, well, what if this just blows up in my face? What if this is a horrible failure, right? And am I going to get blamed? Am I going to if we only house 20,000 people off the streets, which is, even that would have been humongous given our context, am I going to get a bad performance evaluation because it wasn't 100,000? Right? That was my biggest fear. And I talked to Roseanne about that. I said, hey, I just want to know. I want to know if, are you going to be all in my business if this like really crazy thing doesn't work out, right? And we sat in a coffee shop in New York City, and she said, nope, I just want you to try it. And I was like, you promise? Because remember that other time you kind of, and I mean, that's what we do, right? We hold stuff over people, and we do that stuff to each other. So I was willing to take this risk, and we set a space that our intention was for it to be free of blame and criticism, that was just about learning. So fast forward 2 years, and we finally had enough data to know whether or not we were on track to house 100,000 people, and we had brought Paul Howard on board, and I said, Paul, I know we only have 15,000 people in housing right now, but what I want you to do is pretend like I'm Obama, and I want 3 routes to electoral college success. Give me 3 possible scenarios where we get to 100,000. And so for the day Paul showed up to present to our team, this is, these are your paths to 100,000. He said, I've got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is right now you're on track to be the 30,000 homes campaign. And that was not what we wanted to hear, and especially for me, because I had already gotten a tattoo of when the 10,000th person moved into housing. We had all said what we were going to do to celebrate, the 100,000. I was like, I'm getting a tattoo at 10,000, and you can see the commas, holding that place for that last zero. There's just not many scenarios where a 3 could kind of be penciled in there, and so that was a moment where we faced into our fear, and it was like, I wish we could have recorded the conversation we had as a team, because we spent a half day talking about what are we going to do about this, and what if we just changed the definition so it included more people and we could kind of water it down and we'd still get to 100,000. We entertained that possibility. That's how seductive success is, right? And then we had Linda, God bless her. Linda was like, no, I am here to house the most vulnerable people, and that is it. And if we water it down, I quit, and this is where my heart is, and this is what I'm about. And we came to a point where we're like, okay, well, if it's 30,000 and that's the best we can do, okay. That's all right. We can live with that. It's more important that we stay true to our values and what we want to create in the world than that we water it down to succeed. But we did have a chart, a way forward, which was that we had to enroll 3 more communities every month, and we had to help all of the communities at least double the rate at which they were housing their most vulnerable people. No big deal, right? But here's what we didn't do, is we didn't spend a moment asking ourselves, well, why? Why is it only 30,000, right? So what I want to invite you to do is to have a why-ectomy. Just stop saying it. Or if someone asks you a why question, go, I don't do whys. Right? Why has zero transformational value. If you ask a why question, the only thing you're going to get is an explanation for past behavior or an excuse, which does not move the ball forward in any way. We spent no time asking why. What we did do was we said, okay, if we're going to enroll 3 more communities a month and we're going to help them double their housing placement rates, where do we need to be 6 months from now? And we started a tradition that we kept up every 6 months when we met as a team of a dream board, where we put in the middle, this is where we're going to be as a team in 6 months. So by July 2013, there's going to be 52,031 people in housing, and that's going to put us on track. And we're going to have 117 communities, which was that 3 more per month, really being part of the movement. And we're going to go from 1.6% of their population being housed a month to 2.12. It ended up being 5.1% by the time we were done. That's how powerful this was. And then everybody on the team wrote, this is what I'm going to do to contribute to this being the new reality. So what we did, even though we had a time-bound, clear, ambitious goal, we as a team created reality in 6-month increments. And I think that is the way to go, right? In any large-scale change initiative, we didn't know what was going to be happening 7 months from now. We didn't know where we'd be, but we knew if we can at least get here in 6 months, and we can pull all the king's horses and all the king's men in that direction, we'll relook at it from there when we get there. So I want to encourage you to create reality in 6-month increments. But let's move on to the next sphere, inertia. This is physics, math, it's all this good stuff, right? So inertia is really defending the status quo and defending past behavior, and it's doing what you've always done, right? So most people, I think, when they go to work every day, they have their little habits and they check their email and they go to meetings and the whole day's gone before you know it. You could spend your whole life checking email and going to meetings, right? And then you could be like very busy and not have enough time to take on other things because you're checking email and going to meetings. And I just have too much on my plate, right? Right? And so these are the kinds of things that you'll hear people say when they're just going through the motions with this inertia type of power is sometimes they'll say stuff like, well, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but I think we need to do a local study first. You know, we need to know it works here, and that's going to take a lot of time and some money, right? And like that, and then we'll just kind of, that's like a business as usual type of move sometimes. If I had $1 for every cost study that was done in the United States proving that housing vulnerable people saves money, you know, I would be really rich, right? The money we've spent on doing the cost studies to prove that it saves money could have housed many, many people, right? And so this is, we don't need any more, right? So here's my favorite one from Street Outreach. It takes a long time to build trust with someone on the streets. It takes a long time. And I'm like, not if you have apartment keys. It doesn't, you know? And that's, you know, right? So, I mean, poor outreach workers, right? They got good looks and personality and like maybe a peanut butter sandwich half the time, right? And and yes, outreach work is really hard. I've done it myself. I don't want to be dismissive of it, but it's a whole lot easier if you have an apartment key, right? And here's another one too, the sacred cow and I hope it's just really eroding away, but well, we've always required people to get treatment before housing. You know, right? That's just the way we've done it. So here's some antidotes to this inertia, business as usual, is to manufacture a crisis. Just make up a crisis. One of my favorite books is A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit, and she talks about people who survived big natural disasters and big bad things like Hurricane Katrina and the Halifax fire and the San Francisco earthquake. They look back on it later as the best time in their lives. Because what happens is all of the rules break down and people take care of each other. Also what happens, unfortunately, is government protects property, not people. But amongst the people, they really look after each other and they look at it as their best time. So make up a crisis. So how do you make up a crisis? So one of the best ways is to get the heck out of the office, right? So these registry weeks, these got everybody out of their offices. We have to get up at 4 a.m. We have to survey people. That's a really powerful way of manufacturing a crisis and creating an emotional catalyst. This is a quote from Doug in Albuquerque. He says, "I'm feeling some anxiousness about the need to get these folks housed. The problem with having surveyed them is now that I'm haunted by them." right? And I'm like, you know what my answer to that is? Good, right? You should be haunted by them, right? There's another antidote that I want to share with you is that just this discipline of data, this drumbeat of operations, just that like you're constantly looking at data and making adjustments, looking at data, making adjustments. And as long as you're doing that as a leader, the only other thing you have to do is the rule number one of improv. Rule number one of improv is no matter what anybody says or does, you say yes and you keep rolling with it. So what we need to do as leaders is look for ways to give permission to people to unleash what they want to bring of this. So and one other thing I would say is let go of things that don't actually create change. So meetings with muffins and Tim Hortons coffee, let that go, let that go. And one other thing on this inertia, my favorite rule of Linda Kaufman's is she'll say, just because you say no doesn't mean we aren't going to do it, it just means we aren't going to do it with you. Right. So, trust the diffusion curve. Right? Work with the people who want to work with you. You will get further that way than if you spend any time boo-hooing about someone who doesn't like you or doesn't want to work with you. They'll come around. All right, let's talk about ignorance. All right, so the ignorance for me is both the fear of knowing, right? Like, I don't want to know, I don't want to know, I don't want to know, I'm not going to look, right? And it's the fear like people are starting to get it. Don't look. And it's the fear of not knowing. So you're just in this unknown. But guess what? That's what all of our lives are all the time, forever, always, ever. Like 1 second from now, I don't know what's going to happen. One Mississippi. Oh my gosh, look, I'm surprised, right? Like that is the nature of reality, the unknown. Welcome to the unknown for the rest of your life. But it's scary, right? It's scary. And this is how we see people in the unknown, is people do a great big flee forward. They want to mitigate the fear of the unknown. They do a great big flee forward, and they say, but what if? Remember how you're not going to answer why questions anymore? Don't entertain what if questions either. It's a waste of time. Nobody knows what's going to happen because we're not there yet, right? So here's what people would say when we started doing registry weeks. But what if people won't do the surveys? And 86% of people did them in the other city. Yeah, but what if they won't do them here? And then the next thing is they'll say, well, what if they lie? What if they lie on the surveys? I don't know, that would be bad. Well, what if they don't want housing? Gosh, wow. What would we do? Well, what if they won't be able to keep their housing? Well, we'll have to figure that out, right? This is like I could get pounded with these questions. So I just stopped answering what-if questions. Here's the antidote to this great big flee forward into the what-if world is rapid testing and learning. So I don't know, let's see what happens, and then let's look at the data, and let's adjust course. So one of the great big things that we did with communities in the 100,000 Homes campaign was every month they got a feedback report of this is how many people you moved in, that you said, and this is how you did compared to other cities. So, it's kind of embarrassing for Gainesville, but, Omaha kind of had a good month right there, right? And just even getting that data. But as we got further and we needed to help communities double their housing placement rates, we started sharing with them what we called a takedown target. And Paul created this, and it's, this is how many people you need to house a month to be on track to actually end homelessness in your community. And this is how many you're doing now. And usually there was a pretty significant disparity between those two numbers, but no one had ever actually looked at it that way, at a monthly takedown rate. And people would have what we called tears of change. People would cry. But once they faced into that data and got feedback on a monthly basis, it's a way to help mitigate this fear of the unknown. How am I doing on time? I feel like I'm going on a long time. 5 minutes. Let's go through these real quickly. Okay. There's another great story with Jessica Venegas, but you'll have to read it another time, hear about it another time. Okay. Another fear, control. Trying to limit or restrict what other people do. Rules and regulations and elaborate processes. See? I knew we get to processes, right? So this is the mapped out process of someone from a street into an apartment and all of the forms they have to fill out and all the meetings they have to go to and all the things they have to do, right? And this is ridiculous. And the types of things you'll hear when people want to control right? This is my favorite one. I'm just going to out myself. This is my favorite one. Is like, well, we have a waiting list, right? Or it's not ethical to survey people and find out what their housing needs are if you don't have housing for them. So the antidote to that is that your job as a leader, to think of your job as a leader, is that you remove barriers, right? That is what you do as a leader. You remove barriers. So any process that has more than 10 steps is not a process. It's a mess, okay? This should not have more than 10 steps, okay? And I'm gonna, just in the interest of time, I'm gonna forward, but please just remember that, and the teams cut that in half. I think they could do better, right? There's also a humility in this of, I know this isn't good, I don't know what it needs to be different, but I'm gonna ask you to do whatever it takes to figure it out. And when the federal government started doing that with local teams, many of them quadrupled their housing placement rates in 100 days. No new resources, I don't know what it takes, you guys figure it out, let us know what you need. Trusting and unleashing the implementers in many cities resulted in a quadrupling of the housing placement rate. So, kind of amazing. Oh, sorry, no, don't look at that yet, okay. Here's one other thing on control. When we came up with the vulnerability index, we could have said, no, you have to use it this way, and we could have been control freaks about it. But what we said was like, hey, adapt it, make it your own, add your own special tweaks. We don't care, you know? Let us know what you did, but we're not really that interested in controlling that. Mostly what happened was academics did local studies disproving the validity of the vulnerability index. Thank you very much. I would really prefer to see academics like, let's find something that does work versus like deconstructing stuff, you know? But you know, we knew it wasn't perfect. We knew it wasn't perfect. And we always said, if something better comes along, we'll adopt it. And something in the 11th hour did come along, and it came out of Canada. And it's Ian de Jong's SPDAT, the SPDAT. We call it the SPDAZZLE. 662 counties in the United States are using the SPDAT right now, right? And if Ian was an American, we would name a beer after him. So I don't know what you're waiting for, but you guys have a real international hero here, and I just want to share that. So last fear, and I'll hurry up here, competition. This is, I think, the ugliest of the most ugly. It's fear that there won't be enough. Often it's fear that there won't be enough recognition. There's a scarcity mentality. And the antidote on this is to become a source of recognition yourself, to let go forever of the notion of even wanting credit or recognition. It doesn't matter. Become someone who gives people recognition. So things you won't hear competition directly. It's much more passive-aggressive. It's like, right? But sometimes people will say you directly, of like, you just want to take credit for our work, which that's nice, right? Or they'll say, well, won't this just take away from other very needy and deserving populations, et cetera. So here's what I want to share with you, and we're going to talk about math for a second. And now we're going to talk about hockey. Is what I think we need in the social change sector is something more like the plus-minus stat, right? Where the way that you're measured is how many goals you get when you're on the ice. It doesn't matter if you get the goal, it matters that the goal was scored. So you guys with the whole hockey thing, you've got something amazing. I think we need to find a way to bring it into the social services sector. And the last thing on that is to create a recognition economy, to actually become someone who gives recognition. So we just made up this thing called the 2.5% Club, and that was for communities housing at 2.5% of their population per month. Nobody was when we made it up, but we knew that we needed to get communities to house at that rate. But by the time the campaign ended, 60 communities were housing at that rate. And we got them on the stage at their national conference in recognition, and they loved it. They ate it up, right? This was the big thing for them. So here's what I want to leave with you with is, what is your wonder question? What do you want to contribute and create in the world? What's going to be your legacy? What do you want to spread until every person who could benefit has? I believe we can accomplish huge things together in the world, way beyond our wildest imaginations. And I also think that the key to doing that is pushing down that diffusion curve and helping people overcome their fears and facing into their own fears and helping them do that. And even though I'm obsessed with large-scale change, I believe what we're really spreading is love. And I define love as presence plus action. The ability to be present with fear and then to take action through that fear and to create something different in the world. I can't wait to see what you guys create. I'm gonna be cheering from down in warm Los Angeles. Canada! And I'm so grateful for the chance to talk with you. I apologize if I went over, but thank you so much for having me. Yeah.